Defense News. It's proudly sponsored by Navy Federal Credit Union. If you're a member of our nation's armed forces, the Department of Defense, or if your family is, we'd be proud to serve you too.
On this episode of Defense News Weekly, a new Secretary of Veterans Affairs is confirmed. Find out what issues he'll face as he takes the helm. Plus, updates from the Pentagon. More changes come to the military as new policies hit the Department of Defense. Finally, should we launch an F-35 off that Japanese destroyer? Yeah, why not? Check out the footage of the recent operation. It's the latest in news and analysis, from the Pentagon to the platoon, here on Defense News Weekly. Welcome back to Defense News Weekly. I'm Pat Hansen. With change sweeping Washington and some of the country's biggest institutions, the Department of Veterans Affairs is also seeing some updates to how it operates. One of those changes is at the top of the agency, the Secretary of Veterans Affairs. With a new leader confirmed this week and a slew of priorities on his plate, it's a busy time for the VA. Our Capitol Hill video chief, Leo Shane, joined us for an update.
The Senate this week overwhelmingly confirmed former Georgia Rep. Doug Collins as the next Secretary of Veterans Affairs, making him the first post-9/11 veteran ever to serve in the post. The move gives President Donald Trump his point person for veterans policy changes and reforms within the massive VA bureaucracy. Republican lawmakers hailed Collins as the right pick for the job because of his personal experience in the military and his commitment to ensure that veterans have access to the care they need.
I want a VA secretary who understands the VA's mission. I want a secretary who will put veterans first. I want a secretary who recognizes the VA's importance in serving veterans and contributing to a safe and successful future for our nation. The success they had in uniform, I want them to have that success as a veteran, as a civilian, as a citizen. Congressman Collins is that person.
My mission is for our vets. Our mission is that the VA will be so America First focused because America First puts our veterans first. That's what you're going to get from me. You're going to see me a lot here. I'm going to keep you up to date. We're going to be transparent because our veterans deserve nothing better. And to the veterans who work at the VA and the employees at the VA, you're not going to have a better friend than me because I'm going to raise the bar, hold you accountable because we have a job to do. Mission 1, starting today, our vets.
Collins served in both the Navy and Air Force Reserve as a chaplain and deployed to Iraq as a member of the 94th Airlift Wing. During his confirmation hearing last month, he talked about experiencing toxic burn pit smoke firsthand while overseas and counseling service members about the mental stresses of combat deployments.
I'm an Iraq War veteran. I understand burn pits because I slept next to one for many months. I understand this generation that went for time and time and again, deployment after deployment, in a different way than we'd seen many times before in our past wars and the needs that they have. But also being a veteran, I think I also bring something that is unique to this position almost since it became a cabinet position. I'll be the first member of this Hill, House or Senate, to serve if confirmed by this body, which I think brings a different perspective to my service here.
Collins has close ties to the Commander-in-Chief, serving as legal counsel for Trump since leaving Congress 3 years ago. He also appeared on the campaign trail with Trump throughout the summer during his re-election campaign. The final vote for Collins' confirmation was 77-23, with all of the opposition coming from Democrats. Now, that ratio is better than most of Trump's nominees for cabinet posts so far this administration, but it's still the most divisive vote for a Veterans Affairs Secretary in U.S. history. Collins' previous 11 predecessors in the top VA leadership role had only 16 votes against them combined. That's 7 less than what Collins got. Several of the no votes came as general opposition to Trump's nominees and his administration's moves to shut down various agencies. But a few lawmakers also voiced complaints about Collins' opposition to abortion services at the VA and his suggestions that he will end access to those medical procedures in coming months.
I care deeply about our women veterans and that they have the services they need. So I want to just ask you, do you believe a veteran who lives in Texas who has been raped and becomes pregnant should be able to get abortion care at her local VA?
Senator, that is an issue that is very sensitive in this body. It is something that has been looked at. Here's what the law actually says, and the original law from 1992 says the VA does not do abortions. 2 years ago. That was a decision that was looked at and decided. I will tell you this, we will be looking at that issue when I get in there to confirm that the VA is actually following the law.
So do you plan to modify that law then?
I will repeat just what I just said. When we get in, we're going to look and make sure that the law is being followed from the 1992 law where it said they couldn't and the revision that just happened.
That's just one of the major policy issues facing Collins as he takes office. The White House has also charged him with finding ways to expand medical care access for veterans, both inside and outside the VA system. And in recent days, the department has also announced plans to bring tens of thousands of employees back to the federal office as part of the administration's push to end remote work for government staff. Collins will have to find ways to make sure that those moves don't hurt efficiency in disability benefits processing for veterans. The VA Secretary is one of 5 top leadership posts at the department that need to be confirmed by the Senate. So far, Trump has announced his nominee for only one of the other 4, Sam Brown, who was picked to lead Memorial Affairs for VA. His confirmation schedule has yet to be set. For Military Times, I'm Leo Shane.
And in more news from around the military, Texas National Guard soldiers now have the authority to make immigration arrests and help detain and deport undocumented people. That's through an agreement between the state and the Trump administration, according to our partner publication, the Texas Tribune. A social media post by Texas Governor Greg Abbott said the deal was effective immediately and said the move boosted manpower for border security. The agreement requires the deputized guardsmen to be in touch about their activity with Customs and Border Protection, according to media reports. Texas has recently given enforcement powers to various agencies in the broader effort to secure the border, and recently sent 400 Texas National Guard troops to the Rio Grande. And across the Atlantic, NATO's top officials this week met amidst the early days of the Trump presidency and addressed some of the early topics the president has raised about working with the alliance. Officials talked about raising defense spending and securing regions in the Arctic, 2 hot topics for President Trump.
To ramp up defense spending, we have to ramp up defense production. The exact level of defense spending we will decide later this year based on the capability targets. We are now assessing the gaps with each of the allies between where we are and where we should be, and based on that, the capability targets will, based on that, we decided upon, and based on that, we will decide on the new defense spending pledge. But it will be considerably higher than 2%, I can assure you. We have very good discussions with Denmark and, of course, with other allies, and it's absolutely clear that Trump is right when it comes to the High North, that we have to do more there collectively. It is not only about Greenland, it's also Iceland and Norway and Finland and Sweden and Canada and even the US itself. So we will work together within NATO to make sure that where it comes to the High North, collectively, we will do what is necessary.
During his last administration, Trump pressed member nations to push their defense spending higher and called the U.S. role in the alliance into question, saying the U.S. was doing more than its fair share. That kind of posture and the president's recent comments on levying tariffs on European nations appeared to be on leaders' minds in press appearances. On the defense industry side of the House, the Netherlands has inked a deal to buy new anti-drone cannons to the tune of $1.35 billion. The country plans to buy 22 Skyranger mobile air defense cannons from Germany's Rheinmetall to protect ground troops against the increased threat of drones, according to the Dutch Ministry of Defense. The goal is for the first contracts to be signed in the first half of 2025, which should allow for deliveries to start in 2028 and be wrapped up the following year, a state secretary wrote in a letter to Parliament on Wednesday. The budget covers the acquisition price as well as ammunition, operating costs over the weapon's lifetime, and a risk reserve. When we come back, the latest on changes in the Pentagon and the effects they may have on troops. Welcome back. A new Secretary of Defense is in place, and a raft of changes emanating from the White House are on his desk. From an increased role in border security and migrant deportations, to policy changes to reflect the administration's rejection of diversity and inclusion practices, there's a lot going on in the armed forces. We talked to Pentagon reporter Noah Robertson to get a breakdown of all of the latest. Here's some of what he had to say.
I'm Noah Robertson, the Pentagon reporter for Defense News. The big news this week has been a shocking announcement from President Donald Trump, which he made at a press conference in the White House. He said there that the US would have plans to take over the Gaza Strip, which has been at war with Israel over the last year. The US has been playing a supporting role, helping Israel in its self-defense, but also making sure that a wider war didn't spiral out of control, which sucked up a lot of oxygen in the end of Joe Biden's administration, particularly the Pentagon. No one had on their expectations, though, that Trump would announce that the US would take over the Strip, which is now figuring out a way to deal with Israel releasing the rest of the hostages from the terrorist group Hamas, and making sure that they can rebuild for the people who live in Gaza, which number about 2 million. Trump has said that people who live in the Strip need to flee and either go to neighboring states like Egypt or Jordan. Those states consider that proposal ethnic cleansing and are concerned that they would have the responsibility for 2 million people who don't want to leave in the first place. Trump has said that this would not require boots on the ground, or at least his White House office has said. And yet, at the same time, it's hard to see how the US could get involved in the Middle East to do such an expansive nation-building project, one that will probably last for 10 to 15 years in completion, without having some sort of military involvement. The only time that the military in the last 2 years has been involved in Gaza was constructing a pier called Joint Logistics Over the Shore, or JLOTS for short, to deliver humanitarian aid, which was widely seen as a debacle. The military responded to this with surprise, but as always, a reminder to go and ask the White House if they need further questions. Other than that, the US has been using military resources for its continued mission on deporting migrants that the US considers here illegally. These have gone as far as Ecuador to this week India, which is the longest one so far, and also include a collection of 10 high threat, according to government classifications, migrants that were sent to the prison at Guantanamo Bay, which formerly held suspected Al-Qaeda fighters who were thought to have participated in the 9/11 attacks. These prisoners aren't being held in the same holding cells or in the same area of Guantanamo Bay as the current prisoners who are there now, but it's part of a larger preparation that the president has ordered to make the naval station ready for an influx of migrants who are going to be there temporarily, they say. They plan to construct a tent city for this mission, which could number 30,000 migrants in the end. These people would be there temporarily as they are then deported back to their home countries, which is part of a much larger deportation mission that the president has promised throughout his campaign and now that he's back in office. Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth visited his first foreign leaders this year who were in town to see him at the Pentagon. The first on Wednesday was Prime Minister of Israel Benjamin Netanyahu, who was there right after the president had made the comments about occupying the Gaza Strip. Hegseth did not respond to questions shouted from reporters on the steps near the river entrance of the Pentagon, but upstairs in his offices before meeting with Netanyahu, he said that the comments from the president were a sign of being willing to think outside the box, and that the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again. He said this in reference to the US attempting to help with reconstruction in Gaza in past wars, and that the Middle East and countries there have not been able to succeed in their efforts so far. That will be cold comfort to countries in the region who are now terrified that the US is going to pursue its own unilateral strategy toward the Strip and bypass their concerns, which would likely throw US alliances and partnerships into the region into chaos. On Friday, Hegseth will have his first counterpart visitor, the First Minister of Defense from another country, visiting him. This will be Deputy Prime Minister and Defense Minister of Australia, Richard Marles, who will be there as the first leader from the Pacific, America's most important region, as it's traditionally seen its defense commitments, there to discuss what their alliance looks like for the future. Countries across the Indo-Pacific have been engaged more from the US in recent years, specifically under the Biden administration's Pentagon. It's part of a whole US effort to compete better with China. But now they're worried that their alliances are on shaky ground, given that the US is strong-arming other countries like Panama and Denmark over Greenland, also Mexico and Canada over tariffs that Trump threatened to impose but didn't eventually do. Marles will certainly be there to make sure that the alliance is as strong as it can be, and held a call with Hegseth, his first foreign call other than Netanyahu as well, to discuss the alliance more than a week ago. For Defense News, I'm Noah Robertson.
When we return, buying a house is so cheap these days. No, it isn't. But you still need to budget. We've got tips on how to do it from our financial expert when we return. Welcome back to Defense News Weekly. It's just so affordable to buy a home today. Do you even need to budget for it? Yes, you do. It's spendy out there. And in this edition of Money Minute, Jeanette Mack from Navy Federal Credit Union has tips on how to get your finances ready for your first home purchase.
The number of first-time homebuyers in the market dropped to an all-time low last year, according to the National Association of Realtors. It's no wonder since home prices are still pretty high and interest rates are only slowly coming down. Despite the outlook, homeownership can still be within reach. With a little fortitude and the right financial situation, you can find a way to get your foot in the door of your new home. Start by checking your mortgage options. There's more than one type of mortgage. The right one could help with lowering your down payment or lowering the interest rate. If you're a current or former military member, it could be both. So your first step is checking your VA mortgage eligibility and researching the VA Home Loan Guarantee Program. If you're not in the military, talk to your lender to see if you can get a mortgage with no down payment or whether an ARM would be the way to go. And no matter your situation, you must save, save, save. Every bit helps, especially at closing. It may take a bit more time and effort, but your new home can be closer than you think.
Thanks, Jeanette. We'll see you next week. To get more coverage of military and defense topics, lock on with your targeting system to militarytimes.com and defensenews.com for more headlines. And to be the smartest airman in the hangar, sign up for our early bird brief, compiled each morning bringing you the most recent headlines. Lastly, if social media is where you collect open source intelligence, follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and X. And if you get your news by scrolling with your thumb, we're on TikTok, so go find us there as well. When we come back, a look at the unique mindset formed by members of the Finnish military when they operate in the cold. Learn about Sisu when we return. Welcome back to Defense News Weekly. I'm Pat Hansen. Finland has a hardy force of soldiers ready to defend their homeland. But they aren't just born with built-in resilience and an ability to operate in cold weather. Instead, they embody a quality called sisu, a mindset that means composure in the face of adversity, but is described by troops as a fortitude found after reaching a breaking point while operating in a harsh environment. Either way, here's more about the concept in the words of the troops themselves. Brought to you by our partners at the NATO channel. Check it out.
Sisu. You cannot understand that word if you haven't been in Finland. You have to come here and be outside in the point of breaking. When you got so angry, you have no other choice than keep going on. The times have changed in the names of war. It's not as simple as we learned it to be when we grew up. Like wars are in the past. We have learned that they are not. For me, it's because I have a good life. That's why I'm here protecting it. We had the NATO Alliance survival training. It was basically a week with no sleep, with basically no food. That was intense being outside like 10 hours a day.
Why would you put yourself through this?
Yeah. I ask myself that.
We have snow, then we have the aurora. We have one day in winter that we don't have sun at all. Then we have one day in the summer when we don't have dark at all. You don't meet the same kind of people anywhere else that you meet in Lapland.
Does it mean courage?
I don't think that catches the whole meaning, because it's like a fuel of anger you get when you are on the breaking point. And you can find that here in Finland.
Finally, should we launch these American fighter jets off a Japanese modified destroyer? Sure, why not? Images released in late January show the F-35 Patuxent River Integrated Test Force executing a developmental test program aboard the Japanese Maritime Self-Defense Force multifunctional destroyer Kaga during sea trials in the Eastern Pacific Ocean. Sounds pretty cool. Have a look at what they were up to.
Right now we're on board JS Kaga, the flagship of the Japanese Navy. It's a converted multi-purpose destroyer which has been modified for F-35B operations. We're in the Pacific conducting a developmental test program to evaluate the ship's suitability for F-35B and generate the data we need to issue Japan with the recommendations for how they can operate with that aircraft in the future.
Some of the overall goals for this trial are to clear wind envelopes for F-35 operations aboard Izumo-class multi-purpose ships, mainly at spots 4 and 5 where they plan to operate their F-35s from on a regular basis.
Our job is to generate a clearance for the primary use spots, that's at the back of the ship. We've got a lot of other novel test points that we're conducting in order to give unusual capabilities that might be needed in specific situations. And those include being able to land the aircraft facing aft, being able to land the aircraft cross-axially, so facing across the deck, and also being able to take off from the deck, so perform a vertical takeoff.
The biggest highlights of our testing so far is just how efficient we've been. Launching on our recovery conditions has helped greatly with getting a lot of test points out quickly. The communication barrier hasn't been as significant as we had originally thought, so we've been able to get those communications out swiftly to get these test points much more efficiently.
There are a lot of different organisations that have to come together to make this happen. Of course, we've got the JMSCF and the crew of Kaga. There are also representatives here from JASDF, and we've got lots of US representation too. That's the Patuxent River ITF, the organisation that tests F-35B. We've got help from the US Navy providing our deck crew and the essential supervisors that make flying safe. We've got US Marine Corps LSOs. All of those organisations have had to come together to produce a truly combined test team working with real unity of purpose to complete the trial.
Well, that's all we have time for in this episode. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next week.